case, as in the two prior executions in Missouri, was the use of compounded pentobarbital. And the significance of that is actually manyfold. With a compounded drug, the drug can actually vary from batch to batch. It is compounded individually at a compounding pharmacy, and the entire process has been surrounded by secrecy, with the state not revealing who the compounding pharmacy is or where the drugs come from or what lab has tested them. And an independent investigation has raised a lot of questions for those of us who represent the prisoners on death row. But basically what we see proceeding here, and which is very disturbing, is experimentation on human subjects. I mean, I think that's essentially what it is. These are not time-tested and vetted methods, and I just think in several states across the country there has been a real determination to move ahead with these essentially experimental protocols.
You weren't in the execution. You didn't witness the execution of Herbert Smalls, but your investigator did. What happened in his case?
I have spoken to two of the witnesses who were there, and blessedly, actually, my client appeared to expire fairly quickly. One thing that we have not been able to answer is what he was trying to say. Shortly after he was injected, he was mouthing words. They could not be heard by the witnesses, so we don't know if it was a situation like in Oklahoma, where the prisoner reported that he felt his whole body burning. In Oklahoma, they used the same protocol, or at least one of the same drugs, compounded pentobarbital. And I think we've all heard about that execution of Mr. Wilson, who reported his whole body felt like it was burning. So truly at this point, I don't know what my client was trying to say. We're still doing some investigation. But regardless, from execution to execution, there's a great deal of concern because, as I said, there's no reliability or consistency necessarily from batch to batch of compounded drugs. So each time you get it, you're not entirely sure whether it's exactly what was given before, somewhat different, whether it's safe, whether it's contaminated, whether it's potent. And we get lab reports, but because the investigation we've done thus far of the lab that we suspect to be involved has raised a lot of questions, we frankly don't have a lot of faith in the lab reports we've received. So a lot of questions here remain to be answered, and the problem is we've not had time to attempt to answer them. The state is moving ahead very swiftly with executions, setting them at the rate of 1 per month, and it looks like sort of a mass-produced assembly line approach to executions without time to ask the questions that very much need to be answered.
And Cheryl Pilot, on this issue of the testing of these drugs, there's no federal oversight in terms of the administration of these drugs by the state. I understand an appeals court in that state, in Missouri, basically allowed this to go forward recently.
There was a judge who did dissent from the order denying Mr. Smalls a stay, but with compounded drugs, you're dealing largely with an industry that historically has been regulated. Whatever regulation that has existed has been at the state level. There is a new federal law that applies to drug compounding, but it doesn't have a great reach or a lot of teeth. A lot of the mechanisms in it involve voluntary registration. So this is a largely unregulated industry. The same thing applies to the contract testing labs who test these drugs. And essentially there's an industry here with history of lax or little regulation and very high profitability.
Cheryl Pilot, I wanted to ask, right before Herbert Smalls was executed, your office was on the phone with him?
Yes, we were. My colleague Lindsay Runnels in the office right next door to mine was actually on the phone with Mr. Smalls when he was removed and taken into the execution chamber, essentially ripped off the phone He was not permitted an opportunity, frankly, to say goodbye to his attorneys.
Were all the appeals done?
No, not at that point. No, we very much had a live petition and application for stay pending in the United States Supreme Court.
So they executed before his appeals were over?
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Megan McCracken, you're listening to this conversation from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, though you teach at University of California, Berkeley School of Law's Death Penalty Clinic. These larger issues, how the drug companies are now refusing to have their chemical compounds used. Can you talk about that? We just heard Hospira saying their drugs cannot be used for execution. How often does this happen?
Well, this is a new and I guess growing trend. Hospira stopped making thiopentol. Later, the pharmaceutical company Lundbeck took steps to prevent use of its drug Nembutal, which is the brand name for pentobarbital. Lundbeck took steps to prevent the use of its product in executions, and I think historically, pharmaceutical companies have never wanted their drugs used in executions. They have always said publicly and to the states, to the departments of corrections, this is not what we make products for. We make drugs to help people, to save lives, not to end them. But really, Lundbeck was the first to take an affirmative step to prevent their use.
And what is the potential impact on drug supplies to the United States if states continue now? Not only, well, they obviously, when they do the compounding, have to take initial drugs that they use and then are changed or altered by the compounding pharmacy. Could you talk about the potential impact?
Well, the use of compounded drugs in executions raises a lot of concerns. Compounded drugs are made to order.